Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and I would like to welcome participants of our discussion. And we will be talking today about the 30th anniversary of the Russian market, and we have this discussion at the R-Pharm this year. So we are celebrating 30 years of the reform campaign, which we have celebrated 30 years of Delovaya Rossiya, or Business Russia organization, and a number of other business organizations here in Russia. All these round dates are related to the point when market reforms began in the Russian economy. And today we'll be talking about several aspects of these reforms. What was a success and what was a failure? Let me introduce our speakers today. We have few speakers attending this discussion, which gives us an opportunity to look deeper into the problem. We have Alexey Kudrin with us here, chairman of the Accounts Chamber of the Russian Federation, and in previous years, Mr. Kudrin, for over 11 years, Mr. Kudrin was the Minister of Finance, and the Vice Prime Minister was the Center for Strategic Research. He started his tenure as a public servant in St. Petersburg municipality, and since then took several positions in St. Petersburg's mayoral office, was a vice mayor. When I acquired my Doctor of Science degree, you suggested that I should participate in the competition for becoming the head of one of research institutions in St. Petersburg. Had I taken your proposal then, I would probably become the chairman of the Chamber of Accounts already. And we also have Alexey Repik with us, very successful entrepreneur, and for several years Mr. Repik has been the head of the Union of Entrepreneurs in Russia, called Delovaya Rossiya, or Business Russia. I also participated in initiating these reforms in Russia because I was part of the first government that initiated these reforms, and I claim responsibility, so part of responsibility for their successes and failures. On the 2nd of January 1992, prices in Russia were liberalized. The reform was announced on the reform was announced previously, and on the convention of the People's Deputies, President Yeltsin announced that prices will be liberalized, and that immediately resulted in the fact that we got food deficit. All shelves in our grocery stores were emptied. And in the end of this month, we are going to celebrate the 30th anniversary of Trilateral Commission and Social Partnership Mechanism. Trilateral Commission focused on regulating social and labor conflicts. 10 years ago, Russia became part of the World Trade Organization, joint World Trade Organization. And we can now look back and take a look at the results of all these reforms. The Russian Union of Industrialists and Entrepreneurs ran a survey. We asked members of our union what they think about the changes which happened in our economy and in our business environment over the last 30 years. And here we have the results of this survey. We can see that the business climate has improved, and it has improved thanks to a number of consistently taken measures. We have changed our tax code early in the year of 2000. We have changed our civil code. We implemented various initiatives like like federal or national level entrepreneurial initiatives. We had regulatory guillotine, the so-called regulatory guillotine. That was an initiative focused on eliminating superficial and out-of-date regulation. There was another really interesting initiative and project which was called Doing Business, and we managed to achieve a substantial improvement in our ratings. That project started in 2012, and we have advanced to the 28th position in this rating, but that rating is no longer prepared by the World Bank. The World Bank has closed this project, but it helped us to greatly advance in the area. It helped us achieve a lot of progress in the area of improving business climate and improving, let's say, improving things like permits for electric hookups, permits for construction, and all other things. Russia is currently among the top 10 countries in terms of the ease of doing business. But there is still a lot of room for improving entrepreneurial climate and business climate. So if we ask ourselves about what were the things that we failed to achieve, business is still very much concerned about availability of proper quality labor resource. Business is concerned about the tax burden, no matter how strange it may sound. This slide shows, this is the self-assessment slide. And we can see that Russian business has transformed itself successfully over these 30 years. It has become more socially responsible. Now we have a string of ESG parameters to measure the level of responsibility of business, and companies adopt these ESG ratings more and more frequently. And ESG becomes an integral part of business and becomes a prerequisite to getting investments, and becomes really important if you want to work internationally. Our business still does not have the share of the international market that would match its potential. I mean, we still have a lot of untapped potential, and yes, we have sanctions in place which curb our progress here. But anyway, Mr. Kudrin, why do you think that regardless of the positive changes that happened in our business climate, and these changes are acknowledged by businessmen, why do you think that we still have some unresolved problems which you used to acknowledge during your times as a Minister of Finance, as Vice President, as the head of the Center for Strategic Research? And remember, you worked on the Strategic Improvement Program. Where is it, by the way? Some of these initiatives that were originally included into the program are currently part of our plan. So the question is, why do you think the state still accounts for such a large share in our economy? Do you think we have like state-controlled capitalism, or do you think we have, let's say, market economy? Do you think our institutions are fully in line with international standards? Or what do you think we should do with the fiscal burden that business is complaining about? When you were the Minister of Finance, you had one take on this. Now you have a luxury of a more independent look at these problems. And to what extent do you think decisions currently made by the government are predictable? and are transparent for the business. What do you think needs to be done in order to be in a position to say that those reforms which were started 30 years ago are becoming really, really successful and are bearing fruit? Mr. Shokhin, thank you very much for your comments and the question. And I'd like to acknowledge that you also held the position of Vice Prime Minister in the government of Mr. Gaidar. And I think that was the relevant and the right time in our history. That was the time when we actually started reforming Russian economy. Those reforms, well, the Soviet Union was contemplating these reforms for 20 years, but nothing has been done. We actually managed to do something. We managed to initiate this reform. Let me just give you some key highlights. Now, in terms of the results of these 30 years, Soviet Union used to have did not have market economy at all. It was fully state-controlled economy, but now we have transitioned to market economy. We have basic market institutions, we have market prices, we are dealing with each other at arm's length terms. We have become a player among other players in the market, and we joined the community of states with civilized market economy. In 1920s, ruble was a currency that was acknowledged internationally. So it was a powerful currency. But after 1920s, currency was devaluated, and it lost a lot of its value. In 1970s, we didn't have any private businesses. We didn't have any privately owned stores. So the key achievement that was done over the last 30 years was that we managed to create market economy here in Russia. And every decade out of these 30 years made its own contribution to the overall result. Over the first decade of these reforms, our GDP plunged 30% and population income plunged 50%. It was a severe hit upon our economy, but that was the transitional time. We had to transition from making military products, for making defense products, to something meaningful. The Soviet economy produced a lot of steel, a lot of carbon steel, and cast iron, but nobody needed that. So we had to transition from this to market economy, and our market institutions were lagging behind the pace of these reforms in terms of their maturity. And when Mr. Gaidar decided to liberalize prices, by that time, the cost plan was no longer there. It ceased to exist. So plan-based economy of the Soviet Union was no longer there. So the value of ruble had to be restored, but the government failed to do that. And there was no consistency in the efforts taken by the government. And it was the situation within which Gaidar initiated his reforms. Then from the year of 2000 till 2010, our GDP increased 60%. Quality of life increased almost threefold. Just take notice of these numbers. Quality of life increased threefold over one decade. after a big decline and the big hit that we had to take in 1990s. So over these 30 years, Russia's GDP is 33% above that of 1990s, and quality of life is 30% higher than what we had back then. In 2003 or 2004,
среднего учителя, врача советского периода, то есть мы
we managed to, so by the year of 2003, we managed to get the quality of life back to the average Soviet level and then improve it. So we have a higher quality of life today, but these are average numbers, and average numbers, they have...
один результат 30-летия назову. Знаете,
and average number is not the most accurate number that you can have to measure things. In 1990, Russia's GDP was $0.5 trillion in current prices. In 1998, it was $195 billion in current terms after we devalued the ruble. Now it is about half a trillion dollars. In 1990, it was $1,180 billion. Now it is above $4 trillion in purchasing power parity terms. So we have substantially increased our GDP over the course of these 30 years. And historians and economists mentioned that that was the only period in Russia's history when it managed to increase its GDP in dollar terms. So this is an acknowledgement of the success. This is something that highlights capability of our economy. Over these 30 years, we managed to create those mechanisms which help demand meet supply. Unfortunately, only 20% of companies working here in Russia keep updating and renovating their technological processes and product lines. And another point here is the productivity. Productivity substantially declined in the 1990s. We achieved 70% increase in productivity over these 30 years, which is not a lot. The average increase now is 1 percentage point a year. We need to improve our productivity by 5% every year in order to catch up with other countries. And some of our market institutions remain unfinished. And you mentioned that yourself, the share of state in the economy. I believe that the extent to which the state controls our economy is curbing our capabilities now. It is curbing entrepreneurial capacity to switch to new products. It curbs free competition, simply because there is not enough room in particular sectors for some entrepreneurs, because these sectors are stuffed with state-controlled companies. And it is for this reason that I believe that the state has too much control over our economy. And this level of state control is understandable, given the crisis induced by the pandemic. So this is an objective reason for so much control that the state has, so tight grip that the state has over this economy. And this is one of our challenges. Institution of property needs to become one of our robust market institutions, and we need to have more of that in our economy. So, in order to claim leadership in the world, we need a bigger number of entrepreneurs who are ready to take risks and are ready to do something and create value in our economy. And the biggest failure in our financial market is the fact that we don't have the right number of institutional investors, like pension funds in the United States. They account for a much larger share of investors. In our case, pension fund is investing a very small amount of its fund. In other words, we don't have this buffer of liquidity which is being invested and reinvested into our economy. Savings need to be invested. And I think the recipe for success, for economic success, is this. We need to transform people's savings into investment. And that mechanism has yet to be improved and fine-tuned.
Now, I would like to ask the question to Alexey. You created your business in early 2000s. And now you are head of business Russia for 7 or 8 years, and your company is fast growing. I don't know the way I should qualify it. Is it like a medium-sized business, Excel, or a Rhino, and you were through these stages, rapid development, and you were to the recession years and the pandemic. And if we would ask about the small and medium-sized business, if the business Russia is covering it all, if the conditions of business in high-tech, the pharmaceutics, where R-Pharm is in a high-tech type of business in pandemics, and it's important to be among the leaders and join the international platforms, to be part of the value-added chain internationally with your international partners. Do you have those conditions? Thanks for that. Characteristics of an industrial Rhino. I don't know if I'm a medium size in my system of classifiers, but I would like to tell you, first of all, why it all began in 2000s, not back in the 90s. It's difficult to make a business when you are at school, and the difference between launching a project in 2000s and in the 90s, it was huge. In 1990s, it was like the pirate economy, but the risk was unimaginable, criminal. Entropy type, it doesn't allow us to describe an investment process, although you need to realize that companies and businessmen that believed in themselves and had the will to make the progress, they proved to be viable thanks to the role of the personality. We must admit that the 90s were qualified not only by shaping the new market, but also bridging the gap between the Soviet-style reality and the merit for what you do in labor. And it was also about the relation to the business, not just on the side of the government, but also on the side of the society. And now our colleagues from the Russian Union of Entrepreneurs and Industrialists that use the programs of social responsibility related to how an entrepreneur influences the business. So the risks are a little bit down, but the income is also seriously down. And you need to create and individual product, you need innovations. But if you would ask me about the failures, of course, investments development is not today in the place it should have been. 1.1, 1.2% of the GDP, as Mr. Alexey Kudrin said, and we don't have the equity market system created and the access to finance in long term. Our competitive countries' economies are a bit on, and we realized that big companies in Russia have 30%, but on all decent forums and sites, this is 80 to 90%, and we finance our products based on the income of the future periods. Yeah, the statistic shows it's only 60%. If we would ask about your comment on what's business Russia is about and what's the medium business, and I always denied it. I used to deny it because the medium business is against the ideology of entrepreneurship. Have been something special, but medium business is an orphan because we have something built up in recent years, this system on how we support the small business, the small and medium business. And medium-sized business is the same small business, but a little bit larger. The companies below 2 billion rubles, they have a number of opportunities to grow up, and we have bigger companies, the top 500, 100 of them being the government-run, with 25 billion or above. They have special conditions, but they can reach persons who are decision makers. And they are not that scared. But others, well, they represent a lost segment. Why do you want to be medium business, not the small business, to get access to the equity markets? We don't have that in our country, and that's why. So it's like mixing a eel and a hedgehog. Not to complain that we're small, but to get the understanding that we don't have resources like the top 500 Russian companies have. That's a question which is really relevant for business Russia and for our company. What I would like to do and fix. You asked Mr. Alexey Kudrin. I realize why it's going on. And I would agree. A business, when it doesn't oppose its future to the future of the country, then you have a revolution and the government starts to think. If the agenda is not aligned, you need to mobilize resources. Why government economy? That's the mode for mobilizing the economy. You are limited in your ability to mobilize your entrepreneurial opportunities, and you need to have a look at yourself. And in that part, the new economic structure will be shaped when you will have that segment growing. The business, which is no longer small, but they're not the flagship companies listed at top
надежда наша,
250. And our hope, our deliverance,
вот этот шаг
is to make the
шаг вперед, проходить не
a step forward, not just in industries where it's easy, where you have new high-tech industries that don't attract the attention of the largest representatives of our business, but also the possibility to grow
региональных предпринимательских инициатив
for a number of entrepreneurial initiatives in the regions that will make the landscape for business in 2025-2030. I would like to show my third slide from my presentation on the mechanism of interacting between the business and the government, the dynamics for what happened in the recent 30 years. It is proved by our forums, and you see that the efficiency of business and government between business and the government is important. Many institutional mechanisms formalized that could be called as civilized lobbying for the business and taking business interests into the account that can be taken into the account from 2008, and we wrote a memorandum with the Ministry of Economic Development. There are other tools and support institutions, how government can communicate with the business. And together with Mr. Kudrin, we are on the boards of corporations and the Committee on Assessment of Business Climates in regions. And digitalization is also a tool. And here the leader is the Federal Tax Office. The Federal Tax Office implemented its idea on getting to B2B information flow digitalizations, and they promise us to deny tax checks, tax audits, because all the information will be within the information flows, and all the pre-court disputes or administrative penalties where the government is focused on. It all happens, the technology, and many questions sensitive to the business are taken as is, and the situation is changing quickly. We have the international competitive environment and the pandemic. It requires quick decisions, but however, we see that when informally it's not possible to use the formal institutes, our federal authorities and agencies take decisions without any talks to the business, and we try to get to a compromise, and we managed to. But such technologies, as a reference to a decree from the president when you need to have the bylaw adopted, is often a justification just to let the business know. And I would not like to give you the exact cases, but what happened last year and the year before for the exporting companies, it was good that eventually it was possible to find informal ways with the deputy, PM, and other ministers to come to a consensus. But, Mr. Kudrin,
Счетная палата, а не общественная.
the accounts chamber, okay, not the social chamber. Yeah, I decided to extend my area of assessing the efficiency. It's not only about budget, how the budget is used, but also the government programs, and I believe this is an efficient mechanism in terms of the role of the accounts chamber and efficiency of other institutions interacting with the government and the central bank. However, do we have any reserves for taking the decisions which do not only serve for the interests of the business, but also the business and the residents of the country, the population? Do we have to make it up as well? Do we need the tuning? Alexander, well, I hear your concern and the understanding of that failure of the feedback, the ignorance of the assessment to regulatory action, and I have to do that. Assessing the regulatory action is often sadly quite formal. It's formal or ignored when you list the real risks. And the accounts chamber, according to the international trends, not just checks the spendings, but the accounts chamber created by the two chambers of the Parliament of the Russian Federation. It assesses the points of the state programs. And when I was a minister, we were focused on spending articles like education, science and defense, and assessing the efficiency is assessing on how this very cent influenced the final result. Quite often it happens that our goals set are quite ambitious, but we don't achieve them. And this is what we have to assess today. And this is what our President and Parliament supported, the way for having more assessments and analytical actions to assess what prevents us here. And today I would like to remind you that we have the Printers' Day, and I would like to greet all the representatives of the mass media and editing houses. And that's the main feedback between the society and the government. This is what makes the government efficient and responding quickly. These links should work, and the freedom of speech is guaranteed by the Constitution, realized by the mass media, and there are special rules to be observed, and also social expertise, and the social chamber and other bodies which are independent in monitoring. Today, it's a serious resource on how you can improve the efficiency. And there's feedback institutions and the political system is something like that per se, but we need to make goals of the business relevant, not to have it spontaneous with the president of the government, but it should be a constantly acting mechanism. They are acting, and I believe that we have a big resource, a reserve to improve that link, that connection between the government and the society, that institution of transparency and accountability, a system that makes the state and the executive power responsible. in terms of professional and government organizations, and we can talk about the Russian Union of Industrialists and Entrepreneurship and Business Russia, which play the important role in improving the business climate. Yeah, I see it as an action. And I would also like to respond to your slides. So, where Russian business failed to become in the value chains, the first 2 points you mentioned, and I would like to mark it specifically. We talk little about the modern character of business. It can be internationally successful because it uses new components, new technologies created in the world.
And the point is that the sheer scale at which new technologies appear as a result of new research is just $500 billion. That's the total value which is being invested in tech creation in the United States. And China is rapidly catching up with this, or has caught up with that already. European countries are investing $100 billion. Each. Russia is investing around 40 billion. We will never be able to come up the frontline technology if we underinvest in this area. We won't be able to achieve success and become part of the international value creation chain. That means that we need to use achievements of other countries. We need to become an active player in this export and in the world of export and import. And we have good examples where Russia, good examples of cases when Russia has 20 or 30% of the market in particular segments. Mr. Repik, what do you think is missing from the dialogue between business and authorities? Well, talking about the key highlights, our dialogue is becoming, normally goes along 2 lines. Business is telling the government not to touch it and not to interfere into its affairs, but it does not help a lot, actually. All states are currently actively focusing on boosting competitiveness of their economies and their businesses. And we have a number of initiatives to set this whole thing in order, and Mr. Kudrin is pioneering some of these initiatives. So, like, for example, we have an initiative to support safety standards in our mines, and the tragic events that happened recently highlight the fact that this initiative is not efficient. So we have to focus on spending our resources diligently and prudently, and we have to be very targeted and very focused. And business undertakes these activities, but these activities are fragmented, and you need the state to coordinate this activity, because it's the state who has the helicopter view of this whole thing. It is the state that has the total picture. And Business Russia, or Delovaya Rossiya, or the Union of Russian Industrialists and Entrepreneurs are perfectly capable of performing this coordinating function. But we need to get it straight in our heads. Do you think that we don't have it in order in our head? No, we do have all these things in order, but looking at all these things, we sometimes overlook the context of the situation, and it is the context that helps you better understand the challenges that you have. There is nothing wrong with falling down. The fact that you fall down, that you stumble and fall down, does not necessarily mean that you're going in the wrong direction. Well, what if you stumble, fall down, and get hurt? Well, there are ways to help. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have gentlemen, we have very few, we don't have a lot of time left. Currently, our government has 42 economic initiatives. If I ask you to pick one or two, what would those initiatives be? What do you think the government and regulators should focus on primarily in order to become carbon neutral by 2050 or in order to deliver against our national targets by 2030? I understand that one reform is certainly not enough to rectify all these things. I think education and the quality of education, the quality of teaching will become the driving factor. The competence of working in rapidly changing market will become really important. 30% of professions which are now here will no longer be there in 10 years from now. And it is the educational system that helps you focus on the right thing. And we haven't even started thinking seriously about it. And we are lagging substantially behind the world because many other countries are already changing or overhauling their educational systems. Because the quality of education has an impact on the quality of state, on the quality of the public officials. It has an impact upon the quality of management, and it has an impact upon the quality of your entrepreneurs. And without all these things put together, we won't have the demand for the competences which we have to bring up. Well, of course, we need to invest in developing our human capital. But the first thing that we need to do first, we need to switch from preserving approach to fostering approach, an approach that will be focused on discovering new potential and new capability, meaning that we need to give participants of this system the right to make mistakes. Because that's the key problem we have. 50% of reforms is not needed because they don't change much. Or 50% of the people do not need this reform because they are fine. But another 50% is scared to do the reform. Yeah, but they are scared because the accounts chamber officials are not the only one who are calling them when they have a problem. Well, my point is that we need to give people the right to make mistakes. And last year, last year we tried to do that in the venture financing bill, and we know what the story was then. Okay, we have run out of time, and we have touched upon a lot of things which we should have looked deeper in. The broadcast of our discussion will stop at 12 o'clock. I have to say that a lot was achieved over the course of these 30 years, regardless of those mistakes which certainly were made. And we know that there were mistakes, and we know that it is impossible to correct some of these mistakes, but we need to learn from this experience. And one of the mistakes we definitely made was we did not properly communicate with people. We didn't make these reforms transparent, and we did not properly communicate what we are going to achieve by doing this reform. So we have several milestones ahead of us, like 2030 and 2050. And in 2050, I would like to look back and say that 2020s were not lost. And in the decade that started in 2020, we were fully up to the challenges of time, of which there is a lot. There are tech challenges, digital challenges. There's a challenge related to the fact that our educational system is lagging behind, and that may translate into our chronic lag. But I think that Russian Accounts Chamber, Business Russia, our president and our government will help us meet and face these challenges. Thank you very much. It was a very interesting discussion, and I do think that some of the topics we talked about today will be deeper explored during other discussions. It's just the very beginning of this forum, and thank you so much.